Hello, and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. In today's interview with Becky Huttenga, I had the opportunity to talk with her in depth about a subject that pertains to a lot of people in developing countries, especially around city and high growth areas, about farmland preservation. Becky is probably one of the most passionate people I've ever met about farmland preservation. She does a lot of work with that in the state of Michigan, and especially the county that I'm in, Ottawa County, here in Western Michigan, which is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. So we discuss several different ways that farmland preservation happens. We also go in depth about some of the reasons why it's so important to preserve farmland, like water quality and things of that nature. So I hope you enjoy and get some new perspectives on the topic of farmland preservation in our interview with Becky Huttenga. Well, Becky Huttenga, thank you so much for joining us today on the AgCulture Podcast. I'm excited and looking forward to our conversation today about farmland preservation. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You always know I like to talk about farmland preservation whenever I can.
It's a big passion of yours. Where does that really come from?
Well, it really didn't come from any specific place. It just kind of was the path I took, and I ended up being really fortunate to find this body of work that I really, really enjoy. I've grown up in farming. Granted, it's hobby farming. My dad made sure we had every kind of animal on the farm. I think except for hogs, 4-H kids. Really enjoyed that growing up. Enjoyed it so much that I went to Michigan State, got a bachelor's degree in animal science, did my master's work there. And then my life path with children and all of these things, took a bunch of twists and turns. But keeping that story short, when I came to the county, the Farmland Preservation Program was not necessarily in my purview, but it was in my department. But then the leadership came open. So it was handed to me, and I started digging into it. And the more I learned and the more I did it, the more I loved it. And now it's something I really, really enjoy and have become passionate about. I love the connections I can make statewide and nationwide with other practitioners. It's just been really fun. So it wasn't very intentional, but I'm glad that it happened anyway.
Yeah, and I guess I should preface it. So you're located in my county, Ottawa County, here in Western Michigan, but you do speak on farmland preservation around the state and even around the nation, right?
Yeah, I do. I'm very fortunate that we're all close practitioners in the community, and I've been invited a lot of different places, Great Lakes Crop Summit up in Mount Pleasant and a number of different places statewide to talk about farmland preservation. It's not happening just in Ottawa County farmland loss. It's happening everywhere. So I feel really fortunate that I'm able to go out and help tell that story, like you said, around the state and also nationwide periodically, pretty much mostly in the state, but with the networks that we have, sometimes nationwide.
Yeah. What are the big reasons that you see farmland preservation is necessary?
Well, I see it, but also, you have to watch the data. So the big thing that's happening, and a lot of people want to point to other larger, more noticeable issues, like solar has been a big one. And that's not a topic we'll get into too deep, but by and large, the data comes down to if you're rezoning from agricultural to rural residential. Not to say that there aren't other contributing factors, but if you're going to pick one that the data will support, both locally and nationwide, it's the transition of farmland from agriculture to R1 residential. That's what really chews up our farmland.
And a lot of that probably really stems from a localized level, at least in the U.S., on a township level of the planning then the master plan that the township puts together, right?
Yes, it's been said by a lot of different practitioners, both who work in farmland preservation as their primary occupation and those who work at the local unit level and kind of around the agriculture world, is that probably the number one thing that affects farmland preservation or can slow farmland loss is good quality zoning, planning, zoning enforcement, future land use plans, and sticking to those plans. that really, by and large, is one of the biggest factors in successful prevention of farmland loss.
Yep. And here in West Michigan, we've got some unique growing regions. We've got a lot of diversity in crops, and a lot of that type of land can't be found in other areas. So what type of role does that play into what we're doing here in West Michigan?
Well, it is very unique. And if we're speaking strictly to some of the tools that we can use to put conservation easements on farmland, which is one of the ways we can protect it, there are different things that can qualify specialty cropland, smaller farms to get funding to get a conservation easement on there. So there's some uniquenesses that are accounted for in some of our farmland preservation tools. Now, one thing that I just learned, one of the tools does tie back to if in your community and or your state you have documented planning documents or policy of some sort that supports farmland preservation, you can qualify more unique agricultural land. Like maybe it doesn't have the soil profile that it's needed to get funding, but it has a unique soil that does support very specific local products. Mm-hmm. That policy could qualify for farmland protection. So there's a number of different ways that we can embrace all the different types of agriculture and what they contribute to the economy and qualify that for conservation easements. So those are a few of the ways, and we won't get too deep into that. Then we're in the weeds.
What are some of the other ways? I mean, we just mentioned conservation easement. We mentioned obviously good planning on a localized level. I think it's really important to keep that local because the community really knows what direction they want to go, right? Not necessarily a state or federal level. Yeah. What other tools are there besides just an all-out farmland preservation program?
There's a lot of tools, and you're right. We touched on one very important one, and that's the planning and the zoning, but it's also so subject to change. Mm-hmm. You know, elections happen every couple of years. Rules change. Private landowner property rights and desires change. So we don't have a lot of control over that. The thing that we really like about conservation easements is that it's prescriptive. It's defined. You know, you put that conservation easement on that land and you have that forever and you can quantify it. But the best tools, unfortunately, are some of those more subjective ones. And added on to the planning and zoning as being important is also succession and land transfer. Mm-hmm. Having a plan to keep your land in agriculture and someone to pass it on to is really a better way than placing an easement on it. Easements are important, and it's one part of the whole structure, mm-hmm. but succession and land transfer is really, quite frankly, probably more important and more effective in the long run, but it's very difficult. It's very personal. It's a very long process. There's costs associated with it. There's some family discomfort associated with that usually. So it's a tough one to really catalyze and incentivize people to do that, but it's a really, really effective one. So there's a number of different things. And there's other places around the country that use some different policy tools that maybe we don't use here, you know, different policy tools that can help beginning farmers be successful. Certain ones we have here, certain ones we do not. Broader, and some people might feel more restrictive, zoning policies. Like in the state of Oregon, they have some statewide policies that create agricultural zones. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of variation. There's some things we're trying here. There's some things we're not trying. When I say here, I'm referencing Ottawa County specifically, but also Michigan in general. I would say, I mean, our policy scorecard, according to American Farmland Trust, which tells us how good of a job we're doing trying to protect farmland, we score pretty well on that. But I still think there's a lot of tools left on the table we could be using as a state and as a local community to help protect farmland.
Yeah. I know I saw an interesting example of farmland encroachment and loss of farmland at a rapid pace. I was in Eastern Texas for my global studies travel that I did back in, I believe it was March. I was down there, mm-hmm. and it was really interesting to see how quickly, especially around that Dallas-Fort Worth and down toward Austin, like it's a great climate. They do have some water down there. It's not like West Texas where this seems to always be in drought, and a lot of people just want to live there, and it's really hard to stop people. And everyone wants their 2 acres to have their pony or a cow on, and that takes up a lot of useful farmland. And it was really interesting to see the dynamics of how does agriculture deal with that. Typically in agriculture, we want to be left alone, right? We don't want policies, we don't want restrictions. We like our property rights, but at the same time, that was also kind of a hindrance and a detriment because of the lack of planning in the communities there, where it was just the farms were getting swallowed up, and the social aspect of the communities were changing so rapidly that one day it was everyone's a farmer, to the next day that, well, you need to cut your grass in your hayfield because it's too long to be a yard. That was an actual real issue that we were discussing down there.
Yeah.
So it really changed the dynamics of their community. So I really, after seeing that, saw a need. What is that balance between your private citizen rights of property ownership and that planning? So is there any insight or perspective you can give on seeing that? I mean, we've kind of dealt with that in Ottawa County in the past.
Yes. And we have. And I think every community is going to continue to. And I think that's always going to be ebbing and flowing, depending on who's in leadership, because it is such a tough one. Like Denny over in Kent County, a practitioner I work with a lot, a comment he always makes is, 10 acres is too big to mow and too small to farm. We don't need to make those small, bucolic, chunks of land that everybody wants. And you're right. I want it. Who doesn't want that? Everybody wants to live like that. But we also want to eat, and we don't want to pay, through the nose to eat that food. And we want our farmers to be viable. Yeah. So it is a really tough one, finding that balance between private property owner rights, the rights of the people who farm the land, and also the rights to quiet enjoyment of the community around them. So it does come down to really robust zoning. And I think one of the things that Michigan Farm Bureau is promoting right now is probably really important, and that is engagement of farmers on your local boards. And, not that farmers aren't busy enough already. I mean, who has time to go to meetings in the evenings? You're already going to a bunch of meetings, but it is important, because if you don't have farmers at the table, they're not getting that perspective. Like just last Friday, myself and a colleague sat down with 2 of our legislators to discuss an issue that's in the budget. It's an issue that's very important to agriculture. Some of your listeners might know about the Michigan Ag Environmental Assurance Program issue in the budget in the state of Michigan. If you're listening and you know. If you don't, it's beside the point. The point is that we have the good fortune in Ottawa County to have 2 legislators that are farmers. They understand it. So many communities have legislators that have never been on a farm. Right. I think it's really important that the farming community, if they can get a legislator, especially those who are not farmers, out and show them how it works, how it doesn't work, and talk to them about farming, then when they're looking at policies and legislation that support farming, or maybe, move into planning and zoning and things like that, I think it's really important for farmers to be at the table telling that story. I think it's an impact that goes well beyond what we can imagine. I've been told often our local program and many programs around the Midwest will go out east, because they've been doing farmland protection through conservation easements for much longer than we have. So we'll do like a road show out there, and they teach us how it works and show us all the outcomes. And they've taken people out on that trip that, standing here, not fully understanding how it works, they get on that van and they go on that tour, and they come back and they're believers. They left and they really didn't support it, but they come back and they're believers. So that power of having them, be fully immersed and fully understand is really, really valuable. And I think, trying to find that balance on what laws are being passed, how is policy being made, and how does it affect farmland that we need to produce food. I think making sure everybody has as much of a firsthand understanding of that as they can is really important. Yeah.
What are those people that went on that tour that maybe had some reservations about farmland preservation? What were some of the things that they brought up that said, I don't know about it because of this? Or what were some of the challenges that they offered?
A lot of the trips that happened were before my time, so I didn't interact firsthand when they returned. But I suspect that a lot of the time was myth busting about what conservation easements actually do and what they don't do, how they affect property values and how they don't. I think a lot of the negative things you hear about, which aren't a lot, but when you do hear negative things about conservation easements, oftentimes it's a one-off or an anecdotal story that really isn't supported by data. Everything doesn't always go exactly according to plan, but usually those are just these unusual situations that pop up that are really not the norm when you're working with conservation easements. So I think breaking down those myths was probably the biggest thing when those folks go out there and truly understand it, and not just stories that have become inflamed over the years about what happened on a conservation easement in Clinton County, 35 years ago, So a little bit more real-time information. So, yeah.
What are some of the maybe community aspects? I mean, outside of the farmer maybe getting to say, my farm is preserved, I'll get some money for those development rights in the program that we're both a part of. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, what are the community aspects that they see maybe social value in?
They being the farmer?
The community.
The farmer. What are the social aspects they see value in permanently preserving farms?
Yeah. So Ottawa County, why would Ottawa County, somebody that lives on a quarter acre in a subdivision in Ottawa County, why should they care about farmland preservation?
Right. And that's very much the story we have to tell. And I think that right now, as we were speaking a little bit before we came on the air, we were talking about how well poised the communities are right now to educate people on that. People want to know about their local food shed, where their food comes from. People are attending local direct sale farm markets and direct off the farm in numbers like we've never seen. So it's really important to folks right now. I think maybe a number of years ago, maybe pre-COVID, it was more about the pretty rolling landscape. As long as there wasn't a spread manure on that landscape at that particular moment, everybody thinks it's fantastic. Yeah, because animals don't poop. Or yeah, so I think more and more now people are recognizing they want that food grown locally. They want to know where it came from. In my mind, that is a double-sided coin, because those people that want to know sometimes maybe don't have the right image or story behind large-scale farming that we are always going to need. So I always approach that a little bit cautiously, because direct sale is great. Local is great. These are all good things. But sometimes when people value those things, it's because maybe they have some misconceptions about how we produce food at scale and how we're always going to need to do that. Yep. So I just like to frame that a little bit when I say that. But I think the communities more and more are recognizing the value of eating local, and it stems also kind of from the small business aspect of recycling those dollars locally. For every $1 spent locally, it turns over 7 times. It's not going to somebody's family in a different community, through some corporate system, so these are all good things.
Well, I think even an example of somebody as simple as growing a bushel of soybeans in our county, right? Mm-hmm. We have a large soybean processor located in our county that does value-added soybean processing. I get bean meal from that. Yep. So my dairy farm in this county gets bean meal. It's so many aspects of the economy that touches that I don't think a lot of people really realize the value creation in our local community based off of the land. It all starts with the land.
Right. Yeah. And you start to think about how many times that goes around,
Right.
So the grower, I can think of a couple, I don't know if we name names, but okay. So they grow the soybeans, they sell it to Zealand, they process it. You buy it, you feed it to your cattle, you make your living, you spend it here at the local grocery stores and the local businesses, and it just keeps going around and around.
Right.
And this is fantastic. And you hit on a good point of the processors who create jobs, who reduce climate footprint because they're not trucking things so far. All these good benefits, the processors come to where the lots of different variety and lots of different, quantities and volumes of different things they need are, like Gerber baby foods and Leprino, and I think I can name names. These are big, it's all right.
They're all
they're all local. Yeah. So they are all, they want to site themselves where they have easy access to the things they need, water for processing, and that creates jobs, and it creates, taxes for our local schools, so it's a big deal. Agriculture is a big deal in our state and in our county.
Yeah.
Yep. And we need that land. So like the land, the plane to farmland protection, we're never going to do it without a land base. I don't care how good we get at container farming, Small farm vegetables. We're always going to need protein. We're always going to need corn, soybean, wheat. It's always going to take farming at scale that requires a land base.
Yeah.
That's just all there is to it. There isn't anything that's going to change that. So we need to slow that loss. We're always going to lose farmland. That's not going to stop either. Our goal is to slow the loss as much as we can.
Yeah. I think another aspect too that I really didn't think about when I originally thought of farmland preservation, but we had, I didn't say this earlier. I'm on the Farmland Preservation Board for our county. That's how Becky and I meet. But you brought into one of our meetings a gentleman that that looks at the water resources, groundwater resources in the state, and that was something that I didn't think about at all until we had that discussion. I think that was a very valuable discussion to talk about what the farmland does. Again, for the community, the local community, it's what takes in the water and allows the water to stop and soak through and go and recharge our groundwater again, right?
Yep. Well, in some areas.
In some areas, yeah.
we learn not all areas.
But that's an important part of the whole water cycle for the community to have a clean, reliable source of water.
Yep.
And that's something that happens over hundreds and hundreds of years. And once you break that cycle, it can cause a lot of issues.
It can. And to build on your point with water, and you've heard me mention this, it's something that I say in a lot of my presentations too, this is a little bit Chicken Little, but not, there's a lot of truth to it, is that we're in the Great Lakes Basin. Yeah. We have an abundance of fresh water. There
were 20% of the world's surface water surrounded by us right now.
Yeah, and we have all the water that's below our feet.
Yeah.
But we are in a good position from a water standpoint, and there are places more and more out west and in other countries that don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
We can't really even comprehend. Maybe you can, because you've done a lot of traveling and talked to a lot of different farming communities now. You might have a better grip on this, but
my Australian friends.
Yes, I can't really wrap my head around how challenging that must be. So that means what's going to happen is that it becomes more and more challenging, and farm viability, I don't care where you are, is always an issue. Mm-hmm. Farmers are going to be more concentrated in those places where it's easier to do business, which is here. But people are also wanting to move here because we have less natural disasters, less crazy swings in climate events and stuff. So there's going to be a lot more people coming, wanting to live here and send their kids to school here. So you planners and zoners in the world, and you people that are planning on running for those commissions, you have your work cut out for you to try to find that balance. I think the one thing that was super interesting that you brought back to one of the last board meetings were the comments that you made about how Germany handles that type of thing. And I don't know if that's, there's so many rabbit holes to go down, but there's a lot of different ways to do things. And keeping people where people should be and keeping land where land should be is tricky, because now you're restricting in some form or the other, whether it's through a tax or through a zoning ordinance, what people can and can't do with the property that they own. And it can be a challenge. We're a very conservative county here in Ottawa, and we handle things very differently than, not to bring politics into the matter, but that is a real thing when you're discussing policy.
Yep.
And that we handle it a lot different than perhaps a Washtenaw County or a different state, so there's all
I think that's why it's so
dynamics.
Important to look at it at a local level, because the local community that's going to be most affected by it should really have the input of what's going to happen to them, right?
Yeah. And we're very fortunate to have a long farming heritage here in Ottawa County. You don't, because you're a first generation farmer, which is amazing. But we have, farmers like one of the farms we're going to preserve here soon. They go back to the 1850s. That's when the Dutch settlers came here and started, looking around, tiling things and farming and thriving over here.
Right.
One thing I don't get is, how do we get all that heritage over here, yet the Netherlands proper right now is farming circles around us, and sometimes we didn't hit that right. I don't know. I guess something got lost in the transition across the pond, but anyway.
Yeah. But we did get the windmill.
We did get the windmill, and the wooden shoes and the tulip festival. So we got that.
We got that going for us here in our county. So Becky, one aspect that I want to touch on that you brought up earlier is farm viability. I think it was before we started recording. Farm viability and the ability for somebody maybe at there's a lot of people at the end of their farming career, right? So how do they transition that to the next generation, especially if that person might not have any heirs or have any family that wants to take over that business? Could you talk a little bit more about some of the tools or situations that you've seen there?
Yeah, so this has been something that's been coming up more and more on my personal radar. So as I mentioned, I got into farmland protection. I've always been in agriculture in some degree. Got into farmland protection and preservation 2018, 2019. So in 2019, our county did a survey of all 1,600 of our farmers. And a few of the things rose to the top when we asked questions about protecting farmland. Is it important to you? How are the best ways to do it? A number of different questions. That's how the whole survey was geared. So 4 things rose to the top. And we've already touched on one big one, and that's the zoning and planning. That's huge. Conservation easements, obviously, which is what we already do. That is another one. And then the 2 we're about to talk about are the other 2 of the 4 things that our farmers locally found to be the most important and most impactful in protecting farmland. And that, I would like to point out, mimics American Farmland Trust's priorities for the upcoming Farm Bill. All those exact same things, talking about farm viability, having a succession plan and transfer, the use of conservation easements and trying to make that land available for the next farmer. And then land linking is something else we can get into in a minute. But in going back to the transfer, when I started paying attention, I've always been a member of Farm Bureau, so I attend different events, state annual or Voice of Agriculture, different things. So I feel like every time I'm sitting down at a table with a group of farmers and we start talking about succession and transition, I hear it's like almost like a broken record. If they have kids, it's this dance of, is it equal or is it equitable? Is it equal or is it fair? If there's a farming kid and non-farming kids, and the number of times you hear stories, and I just walked into, I think it was the Conservation District annual meeting just this past year, completely organic. I wasn't given a presentation, farmland protection wasn't even like something on the table. We were just there taking in the annual meeting. And I had a farmer walk up to me and he said, "Oh, what do you guys, what kind of world problems are you guys solving right now?" I'm like, "Oh, farmland protection, of course." And he's like, "Why don't you put some of that money into making farmers more viable? And that would solve the problem." I'm like, "Well, you're not wrong. If farmers could make a good living to support their families, not have to work an off-farm job, the data with off-farm jobs is starting to be staggering. Mm-hmm. There are so few farmers anymore that don't work an off-farm job. I mean, someone of the married couples that farm do, but very often the farmer also has an off, it's supplemental income.
Right.
You can't do it as a primary income very well, as you know what a challenge that is.
It's a very big challenge.
So farm viability, that's one of the other big ones that came up. And then I turned away from that conversation and I walked over and started chatting with another farmer who had a farm, going through her family. Her dad had passed. It's a mixed family with different priorities. She wanted to be able to hang on to the land. The older kids wanted the dollar value out of it. No transition plan was in place that addressed that. And guess who wins the deal?
The lawyers?
The lawyers. Exactly. Yep.
Unfortunately.
Yep. Job security for the lawyers and the accountants, you bet. But when those stalemates occur, the sale of property and distribution of those assets in cash is almost always what happens. And the way that you avoid that is having a plan in place to somehow extricate the business value and your mode of retirement from the land assets it's tied to. Mm-hmm. But boy, you talk about farmers making time to go to an extra meeting a night like we were talking about earlier. You throw trying to do a succession plan with multiple family members and then spouses and things in there. That's a heavy lift.
And it's probably a multi-year process.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be a one night we're going to meet and it's going to be over.
Yeah, absolutely multi-year. Yeah. A lot of conversations. Some of them are going to be uncomfortable. Thanksgiving dinner might taste a little weird for a year or two, but that's the only path to get there. So, we talked about, my passion for farmland preservation. I'm an agriculture advocate. I love doing the work and supporting it because farming's just too hard and takes too many hours. So I'm never going to be a farmer, but I like to try to help people be successful in farming. So we, the people that put conservation easements on the ground and work in farmland protection, we recognize that the better way is to have good succession plans in place for every single farm and chunk of land. how do you help farmers get there? How do you walk alongside them, keep them accountable, give them the resource they need when they need it? At this exact moment in my life, as I'm embarking on this new title that I have as a land transfer navigator, it's a new project through American Farmland Trust that's trying to empower and educate and people like me to go out and help farmers more effectively access the tools they need to write a succession plan. I have, one of my first really sticky local farmers to talk to they're stuck in that, well, these kids want this and this kid wants to farm and dad doesn't know what to do. And they're at a complete impasse. Mm-hmm. And so I need to find a way to step in and to coach and to connect them with people that can help them sort out whatever maybe dollars and cents things they need to figure out. It's a challenge. And we all know that that's a better way to protect farmland than an easement. Easements are effective and we need those, but succession plans that are adaptive and that people will stick to over time, that's the best way to do it. But it's also the hardest thing to kind of implement or get people to implement for all the obvious reasons. I didn't even like doing my own personal will, and I'm just me and I don't have a farm, and that was hard. Yeah. But so doing that and trying to make farms more viable and, trying to get beginning farmers, because that's the other thing. Yeah, you mentioned farm linking. What's that? Well, I'm monologuing for a minute, but just bear with me. Right. So the other side of that succession planning piece, we talked about kids, non-farming kids. Well, what if you don't have any kids that want to come back to the farm? That's still a viable farming operation. So how do you connect with a farmer so you can pass that on? Because I don't think I've ever met a farmer yet that's like, well, when I'm done, I'm going to hang up my hat. I'm just going to sell it for development because that's what's going to be best for me. That farmer almost always wants that operation to continue as a farm. So if they don't have someone to hand the reins to, how do you find a person to come in and develop that skill set, that institutional knowledge? Like you didn't have knowledge, you had to ramp yourself up for your operation. I mean, I'm sure it was really, really hard. Yeah, we had a lot of learning happening. Yeah, a lot of expensive learning. Yeah, a lot of expensive learning. Yes. So, how do we fill that pipeline with those farmers that aren't, having kids come back to the farm? And the nice thing about what we were talking about before with everyone being interested in the food system, in the food shed and local production, there's a lot of these younger generations that don't want the busy lifestyle, the office job, all the things that us big 80s kids thought were really cool. They don't want that anymore. They want a simpler lifestyle. And a lot of them want to get into farming. And thankfully, they don't fully understand how hard it is. So they'll give it a go. So we need to ignorance is bliss sometimes, right? Right. We need to snag onto that and suck them in while we can. But, finding a way to educate them. So what these land linking websites do, and a lot of states have these. So if you don't know what land linking is, I like to, I don't feel like get in trouble for this, but I like to call it eFarmony. It's almost like a dating platform for farmers that have land and people who are looking for farmland. So the farmland owner can list, if he's got farmland, he wants to either maybe find someone to come in and start working with him, or he's ready to get out, doesn't have an heir, wants to find a farmer. He lists it, takes that one extra step rather than to sell it to the developer that's waving money under his nose. He says, no, I want to find someone who wants to farm this and it will still be economically viable for me. He can list that property here, and then other people who are looking for land to farm can find it, connect, talk with that landowner, find out if it's a fit, all these different things. So find that connection. So a lot of states, I think there's like probably north of 50 different land linking programs now across the U.S. There are some states that don't have one at all. There are some states that have multiple ones that are state level or maybe local. Michigan had one for a hot minute in the northwestern section, but it, I don't like to say it failed. It was a pilot. Okay. And so then my FarmLink picked up where that left off. Okay. Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program grant launched it. It's now been going, June will be 3 years since its launch. We've had multiple connections on there. We're getting a lot of land listings, and we're still in the growth phase. The aim is to serve the entire state. So we have a place where farmers can connect with other going to be farmers, entering, exiting, farmers can connect and give us one more way that we can help keep that land in farming. Mm-hmm. So it's myfarmlink.org if folks are interested in checking that out. We just got a new website makeover, so it functions a little better, it looks a little better, a little easier to use. But as you're hearing this whole conversation, there's so many things that it takes to protect farmland: succession plans, being viable, land linking service, finding an heir or a mentee that you can mentor and bring up through your organization, planning and zoning, so many things
lots
go
of tools
into it. But yeah.
And really at the end of the day, it's what's the community's focus, and what's the individual farmer's focus, and how's that going to continue on beyond them.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Great. Well, Becky, if somebody is interested in finding out more about farmland preservation, we will have your contact information in the show notes. I'm sure you'd be happy to kind of point them in the right direction and speak to what you know. And I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your passion for farmland and seeing it transition to the next generation. So thank you so much, Becky, for being here.
Yeah, thank you for giving a voice to all these important things in agriculture and for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for joining us again for another episode of AgCulture Podcast. I hope you enjoyed that discussion that I had with our guest, Becky Huttenga, about farmland preservation and some of the opportunities to do it, reasons why, and some of the challenges around that. So as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody else that you know that would also enjoy it. And we would also love to have you rate and review us on whatever platform you listen to this on. And if you'd like to find out more about our podcast, listen to former episodes that we've had, and interact and meet some of our past guests, just go to our website, AgCulturePodcast.com. Until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast.